Welcome to the 11th edition of the Reinventing Higher Education Conference. On behalf of IE University, on behalf of Lewis University, on behalf of IE Foundation, it is a pleasure to have you with us today to discuss in a gathering of presidents and rectors the new realities and the new visions around higher education. This year, 2020, has been, as we all have faced, into turbulence due to the pandemic. Now we have to turn and shift our classes to online. We had to reinvent new methodologies. We had to interconnect, among other, with virtual mobility, virtual collaborations between universities and everything. And it couldn't be the difference with our conference with Reinventing Higher Education. It was actually due to be in March in Rome. Wasn't possible. We postponed to November, and the due circumstances of the second wave didn't allow us. So we wanted to maintain this event live, and we are doing this conference today with all you guys. We have presidents connecting for all over the world, from Japan to Chile, coming to the US and Europe and different places. So thank you a lot, and thank you also to all the media connected to this event, and to all the faculty and students in the different respective universities connecting with us today. Without further ado, I will give the floor to start with our events to our president of our university, Santiago Iniguez Onsoño. Santiago, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Jofra. And let me first congratulate you for all the background work that you have developed that made possible this conference. So thanks very much, Jofra, on behalf of the entire group. Let me also welcome the rest of the participants today. Thanks very much for collaborating on this initiative. Again, what I hope is that this is an opportunity both for exchange ideas, as well as for suggesting lines of action to improve and to enhance higher education. Allow me also to thank Andrea Principe, the rector at Lewis, who's my co-host here today, and who, as you know, organized the event that couldn't actually take place at least face-to-face. So we are celebrating this online conference as we did also arrange another online conference months ago. But let me announce that we plan to run, if things, evolve as we all expect, our face-to-face in-presence conference in November next year at the fantastic campus of Lewis University in the Roman Parioli quarter. So allow me maybe at this brief introduction to share with you some ideas, but very briefly, and throw three different questions for you to debate and to discuss at the different panels, or maybe to think and to exchange in the coming weeks. The first question has to do with how the pandemic and all the different measures that we have implemented on our respective campuses will influence education in the future. I'm sure that we have all implemented hybrid formats. We have stretched technology across all the different methodologies and formats. We have tried and trained our faculty in order that they deliver the best possible classes through Zoom, through Adobe, through many different platforms. So my question here to all of you, and this is something that we ask ourselves as well, is which parts or which elements of this hybrid methodology will remain in the future once we recover normality? Hopefully after summer next year, if the vaccine is generalized and spread throughout the globe. What we realize at our universities is that there's lots of benefits of technology applied to education. It can enhance the learning process. We can benefit, for example, from the asynchronous format in order to make learning a much more personalized and tutorial experience. My second question has to do with international mobility. And you are all aware of this initiative that many of you signed some months ago in order to foster international mobility, and that Jofra and Maria Eugenia Marin prepared as well. And my question here is how we can actually activate as soon as possible the free cross-border movement of talent, including students, faculty, employers. I guess that in the very essence of universities, the international component, diversity, is at the very core. This was something that Cardinal Newman said years ago, 2 centuries ago, that universities are actually a sort of mingle of people coming from many different quarters. So this is the second question. And my third one is more concrete, and this is something that I raised to all of you, but in particular to our colleagues Anthony and Peter present here today, which is how we can actually reduce at maximum the impact of Brexit in higher education. We expect, that Brexit, despite all our efforts, will probably take place sometime in the near future. And of course, this has consequences in higher education, but we realize that probably one of the most integrated sectors globally is actually higher education. It's universities. So we know the ways in order to overcome all the obstacles that authorities, national governments, and in general, bad international politics may cause in international higher education. So my question to you would be how we can actually strengthen the links between British universities and universities based in the continent. So I will stop here because what I'm sure is that you will all share lots of experiences and comments and ideas in this very interesting debate. Again, thanks so much for your involvement and your engagement at this conference. And of course, I hope we meet face-to-face soon. So back to you, Geoffroy.
Thank you, Santiago. And actually, to address as our second host today, I wanted to give the floor to Andrea Principe, the Rector of Lewis University, especially also because we have been organizing this virtual gathering together with their university and all his team. So thank you for the collaboration. And also because next November 2021, we will do our conference there at Lewis in Rome. And we're really happy about it. So thank you, Andrea, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Geoffroy. It is great. It's an authentic pleasure for me to welcome you all. I've got mixed feeling today because on the one side, I'm happy to see a lot of colleagues from every part of the world that get together to discuss about the future of our education. But at the same time, as Santiago was mentioning, I'm sad because we cannot meet in person. We couldn't meet face to face, and especially because we all know that learning processes, the process of generating new knowledge, which is part and parcel of our business, is in fact a social process, is a socializing process. So it's fundamentally getting together is in person is important. I'd like to this is my very brief welcome. I'd like to go back to the person that Santiago mentioned is John Henry Newman. I was actually going back a few days ago to his work, and as Santiago mentioned, and John Henry Newman said that universities are assemblage of strangers from all parts in one spot for every kind of knowledge. And then he goes on to say that universities are contexts where intellects are safe to range and speculate, and are places where errors are espoused, and also where the inquiry is pushed further through the collision of intellects with intellects and knowledge with knowledge. The reason why I wanted to share with you this piece of reflection, and also thanks to Santiago for pointing me this fantastic author, is that especially in this specific moment, I think we need to go back to our mission, the mission of being a university, and back to our role in this, again, this specific situation that each of us is living, each university is living around the world. I do think that by going back to our idea of being an intellectual anchors for youngsters, but also for policymakers, professional managers, is fundamental. On the one side, we need to be able to offer thinking, understanding, knowledge to sort out problems, to develop solutions. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we remain the context where knowledge is being generated, and very much so. So, well, thank you very much again for being with us together. I do think that we'll have a very exciting conversation and discussion in and around the future of education. But again, I wanted to go back to make a couple of steps back to our identity, to hopefully make a few steps forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And well, now in order to start our debates today, we're going to have an inaugural panel. But before this panel, I wanted also to thank, because we have connected universities, I think around 17 to 18 of them across the border and across the globe, but also journalists from different media coming from China, from Spain, from UK, from Latin America, from the US. So thank you also for the ones that are participating in there. Now for the first panel that we have today, called Beyond the Pandemic, Renewed Visions for Higher Education, Getting a Global Perspective, I wanted to thank the panelists that will integrate the panel and the moderator. For the panelists, we will have today Nakano Satoshi, President of Itsuchubashi University in Japan, Anthony Grayling, Master of the New College of the Humanities in the United Kingdom, Frédéric Millon, Président of Sciences Po de France, Mamogeti Fakeng, Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, South Africa. And to moderate this panel, and really happy to have her back with us at the Reinventing Higher Education Conference, our colleague and friend Anne McElvoy, Senior Editor of The Economist. So Anne, whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Geoffroy. And all those introductions just reminded me of how the thought of getting anywhere near to a conference in Rome next November just made us all feel very happy indeed. So let's hope that we are able to do that. But in the meantime, we can't stop thinking, of course, and new realities across all of our sectors, and higher education is really at the forefront of that rethinking of new visions, new requirements, and frankly, things that we probably had been putting off for quite a lot of years that the pandemic has brought home to all of our institutions. So one thing I think I'd like to do, my contact with IE has increased my numeracy such a lot that I reckon I have about 40 minutes and just about up to 2 o'clock before Geoffroy comes on with a big hook and takes us off and into the next session. And I think there are about 4 or 5 areas I'd like to get through with the panel. And I thought we should, so therefore, do it in roughly in chunks. And if we started perhaps with the new society model and look at how higher education is responding to the big societal challenge the pandemic has brought and those needs from a humanistic point of view. But that, of course, takes us into the organization of the academic offer and what higher education is doing for its students, for its stakeholders, present and future. But I thought I would start, as you've introduced the panel kindly for us, Geoffroy, I thought I would go to AC Grayling, Anthony Grayling, who's Master of New College of Humanities here in London. And you might just open up and tell us what you think, if anything, has changed about what higher education needs to be before we turn to what it does.
Higher education has always, throughout its more than 1,000-year history, has served the need that all societies, states, economies have for highly trained, reflective, knowledgeable individuals capable of dealing with complexity, with public policy, with managing a society and an economy. And that remains the same now. I think from the point of view of practicalities of how curricula are delivered, we are learning extremely rapidly about how to do this in a new and in many ways a very potentiating way. This format, this way of reaching much larger audiences and being able to make use of some of the technologies associated with it are a wonderful way, especially in technical and vocational subjects, but even also in humanistic subjects as well. The content of what is delivered by these means, however, will very much depend on what the social and economic outfall is of this pandemic and of the changes that were already taking place in our economies. I mean, in the last several decades, of course, there's been a tremendous stampede in the direction of digital literacy in almost every sphere of activity, including in higher education. And that is something which is a bit like forcing one's way through the breakers to get to the calmer water beyond, because once digital literacy is very widespread, and once AI coding has taken over the need for specialists, we will find our economies and our societies in a slightly different place. Maybe that change is being speeded up by the pandemic. If there's a 4-day week, if there's a national wage, if there are different practices, people working more from home because of these Zoom technologies and so on, what is it that people will need from education, and in particular from higher education? And my thought is, but then you would to some extent expect me to say this, is that people will need not just the technical and vocational aspect, but a renewed focus on the humanistic opportunities that offers that education in general and higher education in particular can bring. So I see a refreshment and perhaps even a slight change of direction in that way, in what it is that people will want from higher education and what higher education should be offering.
Let's hear from the rest of the panel. Thank you very much there, Anthony, for getting us going, about how academic models are changing. And we're lucky to have such a global panel so we can get a truly worldwide perspective here. So I thought if I go to Mamageti Fakeng, speaking from Cape Town in South Africa, how much do you feel that you've needed to change the academic model of what you're doing, and how well do you think it's worked? We're among friends here, so I think it's also fine for us to say what we don't think has worked out or is yet worked out as well as what we do.
For us in South Africa, what COVID has made much more explicit is something that we've been living with for many years in the continent: inequality. And so what the pandemic emphasized is that the university, other purposes of the university and our residences, that when students come to university, to our campus to study, it's not just to get to the lecture halls and learn, but it's also to get a space, a conducive space for learning. So it's not just for teaching, it's a conducive space for learning. So when the lockdown started, getting them started with hardware and software and data was not such a difficult thing. We could make that decision easy. We mobilized funding and we could give them. But what didn't work, what we couldn't change, we didn't have control over, is the conditions under which the students learn, where they live, because of the conditions of poverty, but also because of the students who are in far-flung areas where there's no network infrastructure. And so we had to rethink, what else does our university do? So it's not as if the students come here simply because it's convenient or whatever, it's because this is a safe space, conducive space for learning. And so we brought them back to campus even before we can get them to go to lecture halls, the vulnerable students. And so what this has brought, I mean, and I have to say it worked very well. I mean,
did that work out? Because you took something of a risk.
Yeah, but it worked very well for us, because remember that we just emerged in 2018 from a tumultuous period of shutdowns, student protests, and so on, from 2015 up to end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And it is that thinking that in 2018, we thought we've got to be ready for any eventuality. What happens when the university shuts down? And we realized that when you implement mechanisms to keep the academic project going during a shutdown, what you get is political pushback. So you've got to do it when things are normal. And so we started already at that time to put many of our lectures online. So we put video recordings in all the lecture halls. Lectures were recorded and put online, and students could go to them after the lecture, listen to them at any pace, rewind and whatever. And there was no pushback. The other thing we did, we launched our one-button studio to get lecturers to put their materials online, and that was voluntary. So when the lockdown started, we already had an online learning strategy. Of course, it was going to take time to implement it fully, but we already had about 60% of our modules online. But remember that we were preparing ourselves for potential political student protest shutdown, and yet it worked well for the pandemic. The challenge, of course, is, and we are working on that with some of the subjects, particularly the computational subjects such as mathematics and statistics. It's how do you assess to prevent student collusion? All right. And I think that question is not just about how to assess, it also questions what we teach, what for, and how, because then that informs what are we assessing. So, and it's a good problem. It's a nice problem because it's forcing all of us, our academics, to think carefully about why do we teach, what is it for, what do the students go out for. That content knowledge, as important as it is, it's easy to get. So students should not necessarily come to university for that. They should come for more. Yeah.
I think we'll leave it there if we could, just for the moment, I guess, because we'll be coming back on some of the threads that you've laid out there. Let's spin the globe a bit, because we have that luxury as we're sitting here in our offices or in our houses, and go to Japan and ask Nakano Satoshi, who became president of the Tsubashi University in September. I'm very interested in the idea of a Zoom investiture. And do you actually just sit on Zoom and someone hands over, or indeed however your anointment works? Yours is one of the virtual anointments to a university presidency. So congratulations.
Thank you.
That was the easy bit. Also, congratulations on probably the most bookshelves on the call today. When you had enjoyed the beginning of your term, what are the challenges that you saw from your perspective, and how have you gone about them?
Well, actually, of course, Corona pandemic is one of the greatest challenge I faced as a person, as a president, and actually it came very suddenly. And especially in Japan, we may not have been well prepared. And we lagged behind such IT advanced neighbors like Korea or Singapore. But actually, I feel that the necessity is a mother of invention, even in Japan. And most of Japanese universities went online in May, June, and July. Even after the reopening of the campus in September, when I became the president, majority of Japanese universities continue to be at least 50%, 60% online. And the Japanese Ministry of Education found this is a great opportunity for innovation of higher education institutions in Japan. And they encourage us to develop hybrid methods, meaning on-demand and in-person hybrid, or on-demand and online real-time classes. And our university is proud to have a small-scale interactive seminar classes, and we found this could flexibly either be online or in-person, but maybe bigger and more popular institutions, as there are such institutions as for natural sciences, medicine and engineering, they meet greater challenge in Japan, of course. Yeah, that's my feeling.
And did you change anything about the delivery of your digital higher education? Some people say that education or higher education has been moving gradually, in a sense, to being digital without being truly virtual, in the sense that it's all right if you're doing a bit of it, but if it turns to being the main model, then the expectations of the students, and you have very talented and ambitious students, that their expectations rise as well. So I wondered if you felt, even if you're still working on this, that you had to change anything about your offer because of the fact that this is now much more the meat of the of what they're being offered, not just something you can also do on as another way of accessing a lecture, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I feel what actually happens is that both the students and professors are investing more time for their teaching or their classes, and sometimes it's too much investment. It becomes some kind of stressful both for the students and professors. So both sides higher expectations. So yeah, that's the problem. So we may have to change something. But, I don't have an answer right now.
There might be some of us sending students back to university thinking that would be an interesting problem to have. Frédéric Millon, if I could turn to you as president of Sciences Po in France, you have a big international network as well. You're a leading quality brand in education. What have you found to be the opportunities and also the challenges of delivering what you do during the pandemic?
Well, thank you for this excellent question, Anne. And maybe before I try and answer your question or evade it, I will thank also Santiago.
That's not going to happen.
Santiago and Andrea for making it possible for us to be together today. It's a great honor to be on this panel and to be able to talk to colleagues about these very important issues. And also, it was actually both interesting and to me very opposite that both Santiago and Andrea mentioned John Henry Newman in their remarks. He's an author I've been quoting to my students for every start of the year ceremony for the past 8 years. So hearing that you're also taking inspiration from him is very important to me. And maybe to come to your question, and I think that one of the things that I've been realizing more and more as we had to adapt to this crisis and to reinvent ourselves as part of this crisis is something that some of the previous speakers have mentioned already. That is the fact that universities are in fact much more than we ever suspected physical spaces. And the one thing I'm more convinced of than ever is that we cannot dispense with that physical dimension when we think of the future of universities. We are essentially places in which young people, for the main part, are brought together with older people to teach them, but also to learn one from another in a shared environment. And we had to reinvent ourselves as purely online institutions or largely online institutions for the past 6 months. But I think it brought home to me this realization that this was in many ways not our normal mode, and that this could not be envisioned as the normal future for universities. This being said, I think that we also discovered a great many things about ourselves. And as far as I'm concerned at Sciences Po, if you'd asked me 7 months ago or 8 months ago whether we were able, whether we'd be able to shift the entirety of our teaching effort online, I would probably have said, no, we don't know how to do that. And lo and behold, when the crisis happened, when the lockdown was put in place in France, we decided to suspend classes for 8 days. And on the 9th day, we resumed classes online. The entire curriculum was made available again. And because we, in fact, proved that we were able to do that, professors adapted wonderfully, students did as well. Of course, some of them had to deal with difficult situations. Mama Gethy mentioned it, material conditions oftentimes made hard. Time zone differences, which make it difficult for some of our students who went home to follow classes on a French schedule and so on and so forth. But we did prove to ourselves that we were in fact able to offer an education for students scattered around the world at a moment when sanitary conditions made it impossible for us to live together as we were accustomed to do. We also had to look after some of the students whom year in, year out, we send abroad. And we had some 1,800 students at the moment when the lockdown was decreed who were elsewhere than in Paris or on one of our French campuses. So we had to monitor the individual situation of each one of them and make sure that they could go back to a place where they felt safe, where they'd be safe for the duration of the crisis. Now, when we look to the future, of course, one of the lessons that we can draw from the current situation is that there are many ways in which we can improve the learning experience of our students by using some of those online tools that we have discovered or that we have experienced in the course of the crisis. As I said, I do not believe that we'll be making headway into purely online programs, unless it be for very specific populations, but we now realize that we can use online tools much more effectively than we've done previously. The one question which we think we need to tackle, which is an important one for us, is the question of international mobility as such. Mobility for students, mobility for staff and professors. This is a very important dimension of the education we aim to provide at Sciences Po. As you mentioned, we rely on an amazing network of partners around the world, which enables us to send students abroad, to receive students at Sciences Po. We built a network of dual degrees with many institutions, which are felt to be very attractive propositions by many of our applicants. What is going to happen to those physical mobilities in the very near future? That is very much an issue, because even when frontiers are open again, what will be the inclination of some of our partners to resume the forms of mobility that we were accustomed to beforehand?
To throw back to the rest of the panel, but it may be just as you're with the subject, so keep hold of the conch. Just very briefly, give me an example of where that is particularly difficult. I'm thinking about China and the expansion in recent years of students going to and fro from China, but that may not be uppermost in your mind. So give us an example, and I might throw that one around the panel and we can go straight into our conversation about international mobility.
Well, mobility has become an issue pretty much on all continents, and except for Europe, for at least European citizens. So we South American, North American universities, Australia is closed to all incoming and outgoing traffic, and Asia is also in some parts very hard to access. So mobility is very much an issue at present in most parts of the globe, and whether those institutions we've been accustomed to working with will be willing to go back to our previously experienced forms of mobility is at this stage at least a question mark.
Well, let's go back then to Anthony Grayling on that. We were instructed in slightly woebegone tones by Geoffroy to address the subject of Brexit, but I think I'm going to keep it, as the time is tight, quite practically to implications for international mobility. We might also just start something that isn't Brexit, but more generally, you've got a very internationalist outlook at the New College of the Humanities. How are you finding that kind of practical question that I think was being raised there by Frederick about what the level of readiness will be to go back to that, in a sense, kind of issuing plane tickets along with your degree course offers? And do you still think that's as valuable as it was? And if so, what's the fix, given that we are still somewhat talking from our drawing rooms rather than from the lounge at an airport?
Well, if we address the problem itself about what's going to happen to the international aspect of higher education globally, given, of course, that minds and scholars and scholarship. Scholars are inhabitants of a republic which doesn't respect national boundaries and borders. So we do like to travel, we do like to meet one another, we do like to exchange ideas in that way. And personal contact is incredibly important. I mean, here we are now having this meeting, but we're not going to be having tea together later and dinner together and a drink and all those other things that actually feed into the kinds of exchanges, the richness of exchange that personal contact makes possible, as well as between students, one another, and between faculty and students. So this lockdown situation reminds us of the great importance of that. And I very, very sincerely hope that with an effective, safe vaccine, we can overcome this problem, and we can get back to that at least aspect of normality.
Are you talking?
But the other side of this coin is that this method that we're using at the moment to communicate with one another is kind of super mobility. because it means that at a very low cost and very easily, we can bring people together, as we have done today, this afternoon, from all around the globe, and we can exchange ideas in this form. So it's pluses and minuses.
It's a very fair point, isn't it, that we're probably spending more time in meetings online, talking to people around the world than we did. And Marghetti, how does that look from your point of view? If we could turn back to South Africa and the mobility, you've signaled a lot that you take great care about the background of your students, accessibility, the sort of sustainability of your model as you develop it. Where does this pandemic leave you? And I know South Africa has been very badly affected in terms of what you can expect for comings, goings, and for mobility, both inside South Africa and in and out of it.
Yeah, 3 points. The first one is that what we had that we called normal was not so normal. It was because it was exclusionary, and it was harmful to our environment. So in a way, this disruption has forced us to relook, to think about what is it that was not so going well about what we had as normal. So for us, for example, the cost of travel was prohibitive for many of our students who come from low socioeconomic background. We want all of our students to have international experience, but this wasn't possible for everyone. Now, being in the lockdown, we've been grappling with how do we give them international experience? How do we rethink student international experience? And we think there are possibilities here. Actually, now that the whole world, all the universities across the world have been forced to go online, we can, talking to other universities, create possibilities of having students perhaps take up modules in one university in Europe or in the US or wherever, in Cambodia, and we can have students from the other side taking modules on our side. We can create ways of interaction online. Of course, that's not perfect, but what that does is that it will create a possibility. I mean, here we've got to think about what does internationalizing a student experience mean? What is it that you're giving students? Is it the coffee in a different country? Is it the smells in the different country? Or is it engaging with other people who think differently from you, who look differently, who do things differently? So some of that, in our view, you can do it virtually. It will not be the full experience, but it will be a better experience, particularly for those students who would have not had the experience at all because of their socioeconomic background. So we think that's important. The third thing is the staff, the collaborations, let's say institutional collaboration at staff level, staff exchange or collaboration over postdoctoral programs. We think this the pandemic is disrupting how we think about collaboration. I mean, often the thinking is that universities in the West recruit students, bright students at that, from the continent of Africa, then take them to Europe, and oftentimes they never come back. Okay, so it's another way of doing this. But the issue is that we can then perhaps work together, think carefully about how can we work together rather than make the students travel on the other side, particularly whilst we're uncertain about the future of the pandemic and so on. So we can pilot different ways, joint degrees, split side, but also sharing of equipment, not just between the West and the global South, but even within countries within Africa, South Africa, and elsewhere on the continent, to share equipment that when a student is in Ghana, they could be used, and they can connect with another supervisor in another university. So I think, and then also young academics, we can talk about.
Because I do need to get the rest of the panel in, but very
I'm going to do this. So we also have to think about developing communities of practice, online communities of practice. I think that is possible, and it's something that we didn't think about. Am I saying you shut down altogether travel? No, but I'm saying what this has done has created more opportunities and open up our minds about what else we can do to encourage internationalization.
And President Satoshi, what's your take on this? I know that under former Prime Minister Abe, there was a desire to open up Japanese education and higher education more generally, and perhaps to get more people moving in and out of Japan, which had been thought, and it were fairly or otherwise, to look a little bit inwards. Does this create an extra challenge for you in that direction?
Actually, our university, HU, is one of the universities deeply committed in international mobility. But we are not satisfied with the level of we had in the international mobility before the pandemic. And in my university, it's about 15% of our university students is from foreign countries. And we exchange, as exchange students, we are sending about 120 students out of 4,000 students. So we were not satisfied with that level. So we need to increase. We thought we need to increase. And so because, and after this pandemic, we developed the kind of online joint courses utilizing Zoom, or these kind of things. So when it is back to normal, we can, I hope that this kind of new technology will encourage more students to be interested in exchange or to exchange with foreign students, and this will give boost for them to go out of Japan or this kind of thing.
Frederick Mion, you opened up this very interesting line of inquiry for us. We should probably touch on Brexit for those whose models are very directly affected by it. What is your kind of business strategy plan for dealing with the fallout for Brexit for international students? Because the UK government's I believe in being kind of quite even-handed about this, because I think the time for, everyone can indulge their views on Brexit if they like in the coffee break. But actually, you've got to make decisions, don't you, about how much you believe the line from the government that it was basically is trying to sort out the situation for students, and that there will still be great mobility of students in Europe. But let's see how convinced you are by that. Sitting from Sciences Po, how are you seeing it?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to make it clear that for us, Brexit and in the world of universities and higher education and research in general is very bad news. We need a very strong UK at the heart of Europe to make us all excel more. I think that is very much the case, both in terms of the student experiences we're trying to provide and the research we try and produce. So we need to find all the ways we can to bridge whatever gaps Brexit might be creating between our countries, and we've been working very hard to do so by strengthening our relationships with our main UK partners for the past two or 3 years. And an example of that is the way in which we have decided to integrate one UK university, the London School of Economics, in our European university, whose name is Civica. We felt that it was essential that we had a very strong UK partner to make this European university a more credible force. Of course, there are also, I guess, benefits that we can try and derive from Brexit. One of them is the fact that the UK may, at least temporarily, seem a less attractive proposition to some international students, and especially to European students, because if fees were to go up for European students, they might feel that the UK is a less desirable destination for them. And so that might create opportunities for universities on the continent. And we have noticed that this year, despite the COVID situation, we had in fact a 20% rise in applicants at master's level at Sciences Po, international students. So that there might be a shift of some of the directions that, or paths that students normally would be following. But this being said, I think...
Are you doing more teaching in English as a result? Because I know that has been a bit of a subject, to say the least.
We've been teaching English at Sciences Po for a solid 20 years. About 70% of our course offerings are in English, because we feel that it is, of course, essential if we're going to try and address an international population of students.
Right, thank you. Spinning back to you there then, Anthony Grayling, I know you've been a strong campaigner against Brexit, but as the Rolling Stones once put it, you can't always get what you want, but can you get what you need? And how do you see the best sort of way to try to create parallel, or as near as damn it, keep Britain and keep English, that's where English university system is obviously a bit different in Scotland, to keep them in the heart of the European higher education project? You must have done quite a lot of thinking about this, I think, in the last year or so.
Yes, we have indeed. We've seen a marked drop in applications from EU students, certainly, and a drop also in applications from international students. We have problems with faculty who are EU nationals and who therefore need to get work visas, and there are restrictions on that. So it's not a happy picture in a way. I'm very much hoping, however, that in connection with the point that I made earlier about the country of scholarship is a truly international one, that where there is a will, that there will be a way for faculty to keep up their contacts, for exchanges to continue, and eventually for us to work out a way of ensuring that we can make the university experience a genuinely global one. I mean, my college is now part of Northeastern University in Boston, and it sets itself the target of being a genuinely global university in that it has campuses all around the world in order to keep that flow of exchange going. And it's terribly important that that should be the case. Partnerships, exchanges, travel, the internationalism of higher education is a very, very precious thing. And we have, despite things like Brexit and pandemics, we've got to work very hard to keep it alive.
And in practical terms, what do you want? I mean, do you want an extension to, I think the next sort of hurdle, if you look beyond the possible trade deal, is settlement, right? That's what would have once just come with your EU membership.
Yeah, two things. One would be a sort of right of residence.
One thing from the government, what would you have?
Right, two things. One would be right of residency for faculty who are already in post in the UK. That would be one thing. And the second thing would be to continue to keep the same level playing field that we've had for students going across boundaries, borders in the EU up to now.
Fine, thank you. That was two things instead. Very like a good leader of any institution asked for one thing, you immediately came and demanded two. So you would either go home with two or the one you wanted most. Let's talk a little bit to the rest of the panel about management models and student finance and how financial models are being affected by the pandemic. Now, I know there's a merry mix of models on the panel, but that's also part of the appeal of doing something truly global, to Anthony's very good last point about the international community of scholarship, and also the international community of people thinking about their business models, frankly, which is one of the things that IE does so well. So I think I'll come back around your way, Getty. How are you finding your finances bearing up at the moment? Any big stress points and any opportunities here, public-private sector perhaps, or whatever you're up to? I think we just like a flavour of it.
Thank you. We've always had challenges with student financial aid, and our government changed student financial aid back in 2018. I think the big threat at the moment is whether government will continue to afford providing funding for poor and working class students, because they provide full funding for them. And of course, in the context of a tricky situation with our economy, people losing jobs, that group of students may increase. So as we see, for example, we don't yet have, the government has taken over the recommendation for how we increase fees, and we're still waiting to see how it's going. So that's sort of a variable that we know can change anytime. We've also had a challenge of government reducing the block grant to universities. So it's a big empty space here. We traditionally recruit funds from the corporate sector and foundations internationally and locally to fund our students. So we will continue to do that, but we're working on a possibility of increasing that funding, because we can see that that will be different. The question is, where do you get that? doing a whole lot of negotiations. We busy negotiating with labor about salary increments rather than doing retrenchments. Can we perhaps renegotiate the 3-year agreement that we had in place, just to make sure that we can afford keeping people employed, but also be able to take care of our other needs when it comes to student financial aid. I mean, the other difficult issue with income in terms of students is that our residences, for example, we can't take the same number of students that we take in normal situations, because we're having single room occupation. So lesser students. So we are looking at, doing this ourselves, but also recruiting funding from elsewhere in the country, corporate, and in Foundations International. So there is not a solved problem. As we go to 2021, we're still busy working on our budget. That's a very, very tricky.
We like having people in these sessions who haven't solved all their problems. I have a feeling you'll be back next year, still with another big load that have somehow landed on your desk in front of you. Let's go back round to President Satoshi and ask, Japan has such a strong private sector. Is there any sort of rethinking going on about the relationship between public and private sectors when it comes to the model of universities and who should be taking the financial strain for supporting them?
Yeah, actually, the business model of Japanese university, public or private, is maybe it's very different from your countries. So it's very difficult to compare directly with your cases. And public sector, private sector alliance is one of the great challenges our Japanese universities are facing. And we are encouraged to extend more and more about private-public alliances, but maybe it might not have been enough. So,
the strain on the public finances is going to change some of that.
Yeah, we have to strengthen, and it's a great challenge for us. Yeah.
And Frederick, if I come back to you and ask how that is working out for you. I mean, obviously Sciences Po is right at that intersection of the public sphere and private enterprise, and how those two things kind of interlock, both in the France, which is looking again, I think, under President Macron, at its kind of role in the balance of public and private. I mean, what do you take from that? Are you basically of the view that the model that you've got is robust, because I shouldn't think you have a problem getting students through the door, or that you do need a bit of a rethink about that balance and about where your financial welfare lies?
Very good question. I think it may be a little too soon for me to be able to answer it with great precision, because of course the crisis, if it becomes even bigger than it is, and if it lasts long, may have an impact on the fee structure, which are the initial training students pay, but this is a little too soon to tell. So the immediate impacts the crisis has had were, first of all, a need for more financial aid from some students who found themselves suddenly in difficult situations, and we had to raise money specifically for that. The second impact that we were made to feel immediately is on executive education, executive training, because of course a great many corporations have been rethinking their own investments in that field. And lastly, of course, there might be long-lasting effects upon fundraising from both individual donors and corporates. But there again, it's a little too soon for me to be able to assess that. So there might be implications, maybe tough ones, but we haven't been able to really gauge them right now.
I get the feeling that this might be a subject we want to come back to in a year's time, when at least we see where we got to in terms of the vaccine and quietening sort of down, at least that sense that we're a little bit frozen on some aspects. So that might be one for us to pick up. So we're in our last 5 minutes, and anyone who's spent any time in Britain might know of a show on the radio called Just a Minute. Who knows what Just a Minute is? Well, just a minute for those who haven't spent, his education has missed out on listening to Radio 4, is you have to try to speak for a minute and then you're given a topic without hesitation, deviation or repetition. And it has some very funny, as you can imagine, it more than usually doesn't work out that way. Of course, you feel free to hesitate if you need to, particularly you're not in your first language. But I would like to say that the one thing we haven't covered in big detail, although Mama Getty touched on it from her point of view, it's a big area for her, sustainability. If you'd like to talk about what your institution is doing on that, you can talk about that, but you can also use your minute with a little bit of hesitation, repetition, and some deviation to think, what is the big challenge that you'd like to leave behind for us? And AC Grayling, as you certainly know just a minute, I hope that you have it on in your kitchen some of the week. You go first.
Well, when we reconvene in a year's time, which I very much hope we will do, and indeed in Rome, that would be marvellous, I think we need to see what lessons we've learned. We need to be able to capture all the advantages that these challenges have in fact exposed to us. But we also ought to be fighting extremely hard to make sure that whatever the changes are, they don't affect the absolutely central mission that higher education has, in which all those citations of Newman and others show are at the heart of all our interest in what higher education is.
That's lovely to bring us back round to Cardinal Newman. I think he'd be quite impressed that he's played such a role in this seminar so far. Mama Getty, you could please go back to sustainability if you'd like to. Yes, what do you think your year holds in terms of challenges that we will be maybe able to revisit with you when we meet again?
Well, I mean, I want to close by saying, I think universities' challenge would be to remain agents of disruption in a good way, even in the midst of the storm. My hope is that we don't retreat to a place of comfort where we become too careful and not lead change in society, because I think this time creates possibilities for us, whether is to intervene in terms of climate change or be a positive force in terms of society, dealing with polarization in our society and in our world. So I'm hoping that this shake-up keeps us shaking things up for the good of the world, rather than retreating to a place of comfort where we want things to be sort of much quieter. I think this is an opportunity.
So you're of the make some noise party here.
Yeah.
Okay, make some noise. And President Satoshi, you will of course be in post for longer then. You'll have been able to drive through some of the things that you wanted to do when you took the job. How do you see what lies ahead for you in the next 12 months?
Not for me, but I just feel that what we face now is a moment of great transformation, and constructing social consensus and establishing some form of mechanism to achieve a positive consequence of this great transformation without causing much harm will be a very great challenge for every field of sciences. And it should be the very mission of higher education institutions, every institution on this planet, and my university, HU, is fully committed on this.
Very good. And we do look forward to the day when we can come and visit you and look at, I think one of the other things about this conference, it reminds me of how many places I'd like to go and find out a bit more about what's going on when, happy day, we're able to do that again. And that brings us back to Frederick, who gets the last word. What do you think you will have managed to sort out by next year, and what will be in the in tray that perhaps we didn't expect when we went into the pandemic?
Our time's up, so I really should limit my words to here. After what my predecessors have said, I could pretty much have said many of the same things they said. I'm just thinking this is really for us a moment of opportunity, and since much of what I said had to do with international openness and international cooperation, I think this period has made it possible for us to envision new ways of cooperating with partner universities around the world. Getty mentioned very wisely online courses that we can teach jointly with other universities. There are portfolios of online courses we can pool together for our students. Plenty of things we can experience and experiment upon in the next year and see if they make valid models for cooperation.
What great panelists you would all be on Just a Minute, and far more to the point than those who do it on the show. Thank you very much indeed. I'd certainly take away actually a sense of bowed but not beaten, and some optimism that international driving force of higher education, while it's certainly been challenged on every possible front, from Brexit in the UK to the lurgy of the pandemic that none of us, I think, could claim to have really been prepared for, but that there is still, I think, a great strength in not only in the ideal, but in the idea. And I think you've given us all, four of you, thank you, great food for thought about that to take into the afternoon. Thank you to my excellent panel, who have just, I think some of you have to go, waving goodbye now. Thank you, of course, to Santiago and to Geoffroy for making this happen and never giving up, because they never do. They're not those kind of people. And I think I now get to go and have a cup of tea, and Geoffroy takes over to take you through the next part. Thanks so much for listening to us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. And well, it was a fantastic panel, and I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Actually, regarding questions, in order to prepare for the session that we're going to have now and for the Q&A afterwards, I wanted to invite everyone to actually, within the Zoom, and wants to ask a question for the journalist, you can write Marina Moros. She's in the chat. Look for her, write her directly, so you don't buzz everyone. But Marina, also, I want to thank her for all the back office that she's done for this conference. And now let's get on a new panel. Actually, you know that Reinventing Higher Education is the gathering of rectors, presidents, media, stakeholders of higher education from all the part of the world. And this virtual session couldn't be as it is if we wouldn't have actually an interaction with a variety of experts from around the globe. So Anne just did in just 1 minute. Mine will be now in just 3 minutes. I want to give the floor and do a special questions to many of our panelists present today. So without further ado, we're going to touch different horizons in the future and in the visions for our higher education institution. And taking on into the horizon of economy and management, I wanted to ask President Fadou Khouri of the American University of Beirut in Lebanon, in light of what we've learned throughout the pandemic, how might higher education institutions reinvent themselves to become more economically sustainable?
Okay, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Zahir Dawi. I'm speaking on behalf of President Khouri. He had to leave for an emergency. Just something happened a few minutes ago, and he asked me to read the statement on his behalf, if I may.
Well, thank you, Ansel. For sure, we will welcome your answer and all our best to President Khouri. Good things happen in higher education. For sure, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was unplanned and yeah, an emergency. So my name is Zahir Dawi. I'm the interim provost here at the American University of Beirut. And I'm happy to join and just read on his behalf. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start by talking a bit about AUB and then move on to the question that you have raised. Since its foundation 154 years ago, the American University of Beirut has had more than its fair share of challenges. Throughout, the university and its medical center have been a point of refuge to many, whether through medical services during world wars, 15 years of civil war and regional unrest, or in becoming the place time and time again for socio-political change in the region, revolutionary thought and action, and historical shifts in ideology. The mission was one and uninterrupted to provide excellence in education, to participate in the advancement of knowledge through research, and to serve the people of the Middle East and beyond. AUB has continued to serve as an inclusive and inspiring space for dialogue and transformative education to all without discrimination. Since the outbreak of this pandemic and the immense global wave of change that accompanied it in how we live and perceive life, AUB has found itself also managing new crises in the face of an unprecedented economic crash in Lebanon, a steep devaluation of our local currency, and the resulting socio-political unrest and civic revolution that started last October. The pandemic and the procedures to curb it made the repercussions of an already present downfall all the more grave. What more critical time and place to disseminate knowledge? AUB remained an official venue for medical service, research, multidisciplinary collaboration, and the distribution of information. Yet the role of AUB remains key. The time has come for higher education to ride that wave of change, to anticipate it, and to adapt and even find opportunity within it. To continue with their mission, higher education institutions must remain relevant to people, their lives, their struggles, their perceptions, and their hopes and fears for the present and the future. We learn as we teach and through lifelong learning, which we strongly believe in. We see what works in pedagogy and how it can best be applied as the circumstances demand, with a commitment to inclusive and accessible education and our civic engagement and neighborhood initiatives. We make members of the community our strong partners. Our youth inside and outside our classrooms are our best teachers. They speak to us of their conditions and their aspirations, and we together with them work towards attaining them. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our vulnerability as humans, as a structure, as a globe. It has shown the interconnectedness of our world and the necessity of global citizenship as we take more responsible decisions and consider their impact over time and space. It has taught us the importance of flexibility and agility in responding to global needs. The critical role of research and innovation, the fundamental need to be many steps ahead of our knowledge seeking and dissemination, and the indispensable advantage of farsightedness in everything we do. There are many lessons to be learned, and it is the duty of higher education to allow these lessons to guide us all to a more sustainable world. It's time for higher education institutions to intensify their research collaboration, their partnerships, and their exchange of best practices and expertise. This pandemic has posed global predicaments with global impact. Only the globe, the whole globe, will be able to mitigate its possibly adverse aftermath. We are already looking beyond the pandemic. We always have been. We keep our eyes up. Our mission to lead, educate, and serve continues, and it imposes an obligation that we take very seriously. On behalf of Fadl Khouri, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Zayed, and that was just 7 minutes, but we're going to try to stay on the 3 minutes for the rest, and no time to jump from Lebanon to Chile, actually the other side of the world. Federico Valdez, Rector de Universidad del Desarrollo. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what are the main opportunities for the management of universities in the coming years? And do you see any specific difficulties ahead?
Microphone.
There you go. I will start with the challenges that I believe many of our institutions will have to face. In fact, in Chile, already many universities, both private and state-funded, are struggling with severe financial challenges. Okay, the world will suffer from the consequences of declining GDP. Employability will fall, and at least for a while, enrollment should drop, except for online courses, of course. Inevitably, many potential students will ask themselves about the value of a 4-year college degree. Therefore, universities will probably have less resources in the coming years, especially those who do not enjoy from big endowments. And lower ranked universities will be at greater risk. Besides that, I believe that we will see the growth of a trend that is already on the way. Companies such as Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are launching more and more programs to certify vocational competence and lead to well-paying tech jobs in or outside their companies. That means faster, cheaper, specialized credentials closely aligned with the labor market and updated incrementally over a long period of time. That may hurt our enrollment even more. So that's for the bad part of it. I think there are some opportunities. There's been a significant increase in the enrollment of short-term credential classes that we provide. I believe that if we act fast, universities may come up with partnerships with the companies that are starting to offer online certificates. After all, we have an expertise on this field. Technological change has lowered the barriers to international education, but also to reach talent across borders at reasonable cost. And when I think of COVID-19, it's not the coronavirus. It's the third one in the last 20 years. Before that, we had SARS, then we had MERS. And companies around the world need to be ready for new pandemics in the future. We had the experience of close collaboration with companies that seem ready to invest now in R&D that may help them deal with future emergencies. We are negotiating, in fact, with a handful of them to fund the research of our Medical Science Institute. And believe me, before the pandemic, we were not on their radar. Okay, that was 3 minutes, Rafa.
Thank you, Federico Valdez. And now to touch on the horizon of what we were mentioning in the previous panel, international mobility and our diversity. I wanted to ask and go back to Europe, actually, and connect with Martin Paul, president of Maastricht University in the Netherlands, about the coronavirus has caused unprecedented drop in international enrollment, which in turn has an effect on diversity on campus. With this change, the student body, what do you see for the future of the campus experience and for the students' experience?
No, thank you. Hello from Maastricht. I think, we all talk now in our experience about the hybrid, the blended model of education. We believe that also mobility in the future will be hybrid. And what I mean by this, it will be, this beautiful thing we do now that we have the whole world on our screen within 2 hours without stepping in a plane, being jet lagged, spending money on travel. This will not go away. It will not go away for our researchers. It will not go away for our students. Also, for reasons that Mamoketi Fakang said, because it provides some equality. So, and I think our challenge will be how we can use this tool to keep our international population as diverse. So that's why I say hybrid. I believe we also will have to meet for the social experience, the interaction, again, both students and staff and our researchers. But I predict that the volume of this more social, physical interaction will be much reduced in the future for a number of reasons. Costs, the ease of technology, but also another reason. We discovered that we actually didn't go in a big deficit this year, despite the fact that the pandemic, and one of the reasons was that we saved a lot of money on our travel and conference budget and our exchange budget. And we also calculated that 1/3 of our carbon footprint, our CO2 footprint, is due to our travel activity. So there's another reason why we have probably to be more careful. Can we maintain diversity? I believe yes. I'm also the chair of a European University Association, UFA, of young universities. And we have used the pandemic to experiment with a system called the virtual campus, which is an online campus of 10 universities where we'll share online courses and modules, and students can freely choose. And what we know from the students is that they can and use this as an intercultural experience, a virtual international classroom. Why? Because they can interact with students that come from a different country, from a different culture. They can go in discussions with them, and they also can learn different topics from different perspectives. They can follow a course, the future of Europe from a British perspective, which may be different than from a Dutch perspective or from a Polish perspective. So we believe this blended approach is also something that will help to keep mobility alive by adding virtual elements, and that contributes to the future, I think, maintenance and improvement of diversity, because it creates a more level playing field. Thank you.
Well, thank you, President Paul. And now Patrice Geoffron, interim president of Université Paris-Dauphine in Paris, France. I wanted to ask you, what do you consider absolutely key for helping and keeping the values of an institution like Paris-Dauphine intact? Well, what I mean is, university like yours have been at the center of international exchanges, about interaction and research in different fronts. So how do you ever see the evolution of this type of education, of global exchange that can be found at an institution like yours?
Yes, thank you, Geoffrey. First of all, I think that I will find some of the answer to your question in that kind of exchange, because in fact that period is wonderful in a way, because we're able to, let's say, in 1 year experiment evolution that could have been made instead in maybe 1 decade, and all that period is both terrible, but at the same time fascinating. And as regard the way to anticipate what could be the place devoted to my university, which is located in Paris, in the future exchanges of students, I would say that first of all, we will have to face 2 constraints that are difficult to be anticipated. First of all, since we are in Europe and many of the colleagues present here try to anticipate also what could be the financial constraint in Europe. One part of the future evolution of the international exchanges will depend on the way we'll be able to rebound or not in Europe, because up to now, traveling in Europe between colleagues or students was something rather easy and completely inscripted in the classical organization of our daily life in a way, and I'm afraid it could be different in the future. The other constraint, and it has been already mentioned by Martin, will be the way our carbon footprint will be rated, where we will have the internal changes, and also including the dimension related to professors and researchers. But this being said, I think that we will enter, and it's from my point of view, it's obvious, even in the detail are not obvious for the moment, we will enter in a period in which new model will emerge with, first of all, much more flexibility, because up to now, classically, the model was to organize a semester abroad. But in the future, we will observe much more, let's say, cherry-picking model, with especially the possibility to prepare before that semester and after that semester to organize something that will be more flexible or smooth. We could also imagine much more hybrid model, let's say, for example, exchanges between Dauphine and Maastricht, but at the same time, with that idea of taking courses at the time in another university. And the last thing I would like to mention is the fact that we try also mobilizing our ally network to organize other way to spend a period abroad, especially integrating internship in that kind of experience.
Well, thank you, President Geoffrey. And to go to another horizon about the visions in the future that we can have for our higher education institution, I wanted to talk on social change and on the regional impacts that it might have. I wanted to ask Ahmad Azna, president of the Ahmad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. HBKU has been a great actor in the Middle East, offering together with the Qatar Foundation access to studies for many young talented individuals. What is the future of higher education in the region as a driver of change? If you can highlight us a bit.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. I will try to be as short as I could. And I think what I decided to do, rather than trying to answer the question, try to throw some fruit for thoughts, if you would like, or discussion, hopefully, either in this conference or hopefully when we meet in person in Rome. As you know, HBKU is a young institution, and I think this came as a privilege, to be honest, because we've been, since we started, embarked on the digital platform as a way of really delivering education beyond our existence in Doha, but to target the region and beyond that. I think what the pandemic have created in the region. As you know, the Middle East is not a very stable region, and I think the pandemic has really increased that pressure on the students. So one area I think we're trying to really deal with is the mental health of our students, because I think we have seen quite a large increase in the need of support for mental health for the students, especially those students who are really away from home, studying in Doha or being locked down because of the measures that different governments has taken. So I wanted just to really raise this as a one dimension that we need to keep in mind. The second element that I think it's also crucial for us to look into what in the region and beyond the region, I think, is how we are going to deal in the future with the competencies that are extremely important for the success in life, whether those are really communication, whether this is the team work, whether this is other stuff, and how we can really going to be able to really deal with those if we are going to go into the hybrid model. What does it mean? How we can really, support our students to be more interactive and more working together, even though they are really in a distance or using a digital platform, which is really another elements that we're trying to think about, and how we can maintain this so we can provide them that experience. I think the third elements quickly that I will touch base on, it is related to the pandemic has taught all of us that the problems in life, cannot be solved by one single institution or a country by their own. And I think this has opened a lot of windows for the partnership. And since the inception, HBKU took partnership into heart. And I think right now, what we are trying to build, as several of the people who spoke ahead of us spoke about, a hybrid model of engaging in the teaching and the delivery and programs at large. And I think in the Middle East region, this is really a very important aspect that we will capitalize on, especially that you do not have that much difference in time zone, you have different expertise, and you have different resources. So the idea right now that we are working on building a network of experts, if you would like, that they can really deliver education to different institutions, and that really would help in providing you the ability of access to the region without the need for you to travel or to pay, large amount of tuition, because we're trying to cut the cost. And to be honest, we're trying to expand this to Africa too, where we are going to establish, a footprint in Africa, and we will have a hybrid approach in delivering our education and our degree over there. And let me conclude. I know we're running out of time. I'll conclude quickly with a couple of thoughts. One, which is I agree with my colleagues. I don't think we are going to really be not physical in our education, and I would like to stress that regardless of how good technology is becoming. I think that social interaction is part of the educational aspect. And I think the last element that I would like to stress on is, as an international community, we have also role to play in the Middle East. And I think this is where I think that partnership and the ability of really getting the engagement of those international universities in the delivery of the education and the degree in the different countries of the Middle East would be key in the development of that region. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, President Hasna. And actually, to jump on another perspective from another side of the globe, I wanted to ask Rector Carlos Montufar of the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. Without a doubt, Latin America has been shaken by the pandemic. It's obvious. Is there a role for universities here to be social actors that are capable of addressing the challenge in the region? And what do you see as those key challenges?
Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you very much, Santiago, Luis, and Marina. I'll try to be short. I think most of the information that I would have locally is basically what has been said about most of our universities that are here today. We've all faced the same challenges, same solutions, and we're basically on the same footing, I would say. But I don't think that's what's happening to Latin American universities, especially in Ecuador. The majority of students in Latin America attend public universities, which are, in my feeling, the majority are stagnant, stale, hyper-regulated, and controlled. I hope that this fast forward that we've entered in this tunnel It's a two-dimensional tunnel. Like somebody says, we're not physical there anymore. We're only in two dimensions with the screens that are in front of us, and kind of fast forwarded in time. That started on a Friday the 13th of March. We just passed Friday the 13th of November, and the next Friday the 13th is the next August. I think we're midway. It's hard to predict what's going to happen, but in Latin America, I think we're going to have a positive outcome through many, many of the things that have happened. We are growing with more international collaboration. Better teaching and study habits are being promoted across the university system. And that is being contagious to the school system, which is also quite deficient. There are positive things that are going thing. We are savvier on the use of technology. It's interesting to see school kids in rural areas going to class through WhatsApp. And probably they're getting something more than they would get with the local teachers. And the most important thing, I think, and the lesson that I hope our institutions in Ecuador is that government and regulators realize that they have stopped hyper-regulating us. I think we've moved faster than the government in reacting to the pandemic and been able to, both private and public universities, to provide a better university system for all Ecuadorians and Latin American. Accreditation has to change. The whole government machinery, which is based on rules and sanctions, has to change to a system where you basically promote and help universities go through the pandemic. The other important thing that we have to go through Latin America is we have to realize the importance of science and research. We lag in science and research. And I think this is a time where Latin America has to wake up that science and research has a lot of solutions together joined with the humanities. So I'm looking forward for Friday, August 13, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, President Montúfar. And now to touch on a new horizon such as teaching, research, and new methodologies, I wanted to ask and go from Latin America back to Turkey and ask President Umran Inan from Koç University, in regards to online teaching and research, what have we learned from COVID-19? It's a big question, obviously, but what do you see as overall effects of the pandemic in the long term on the mission, vision, and even operations of research universities? President Inan, you're mute.
Yeah, I'm muted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, and best regards to everyone. There's a lot of people who say that this, what we are going through during this pandemic demonstrated the feasibility and efficacy of online education. I believe entirely on the contrary, that what we are going through has demonstrated and brought to fore and exposed the shortcomings of online education. And online education has to be very selectively used when we are all back at our campuses and after this pandemic. Basically, university education, and I've said this when we met at Brown University also, is an appointment between generations. It's an appointment between the faculty and the 18 to 22-year-olds and undergraduate students who come to that campus. And it's not just a social interaction. It is the triggering of the minds of one another and the mind of the faculty in the classroom as they interact and exercise that appointment. Nothing replaces this. Digital education, online education cannot possibly replace this. Of the 40 classes that a student has to take for a degree, probably 3 or 4 or maybe 4 or 5, maybe online, but the rest really has to happen on campuses. On the other side of the spectrum, graduate education at the PhD level is also an appointment. It's an appointment between peers. So the students, PhD students, must be able to talk to other PhD students and other colleagues and their peers across the globe. And the discussions that they need happen at conferences. We all know that scientific conferences, the talks that you listen are not important. What is important is the discussions in the corridors between people who sit down, have tea, and occasional discussions in an unorganized fashion. Those free-roaming discussions basically are the fruits for substantial new ideas. The only place maybe for online education that may globally help mobility and all these other things is at the master's level. At the master's level, there's a lot of online master's courses, especially with programs with no theses. Many universities, such as mine and many others, may be able to address and recruit students from a larger region of the globe because of the online feature of the education. But the substantial mission of the university is to exercise the appointment between generations of graduate students with their peers and generation of faculty with the students. Experimental research, of course, is a very substantial component of a research university such as mine, and that can never be replaced online. Experimental research has to be in laboratories with many PhD students rubbing elbows with each other, learning from one another and being triggered by one another. So this COVID, when it is over, as my colleague Carlos said, in August of 2021, and I like that date, Carlos, then we'll all be back in our campuses doing what we do best.
Thank you. Thank you, President Inan. And actually, I wanted to reach on this mix between, I would say, teaching, research, and also the new methodologies. I wanted to address and ask Dilly Fung, Pro-Director for Education at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK. I've been witnessing one of the studies that you've empowered yourself, and actually that is implemented also at the London School of Economics on the new way to transform its education programs and pedagogy in order to interconnect with the cutting-edge research. So can you tell us a bit more about this concept of connected curriculum?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for the warm welcome. Great to hear everyone's views. So what I would say is we need to transform radically our approach to education in the higher education sector so that our students and our alumni can make an even greater impact for good in the world, and especially right now in the context of such challenging political developments. As I've proposed and illustrated in my work on connected curriculum and research-rich education, I really feel we need to take a fresh look at designing taught degree programs which position students authentically as co-investigators, creators, producers and leaders of change. And that includes students on bachelor's programs as well as master's degrees. So the connected curriculum framework highlights a number of connections, the need to connect students in new dynamic ways with cutting edge research and researchers, which often we say we do, but sometimes we really just don't do as well as we should. The need to employ learning design principles to develop a through line of both of core powerful knowledge that students need, but also optional themes and demanding investigative activity. Connected curriculum framework also highlights the need for dynamic connections for students across traditional disciplines by engaging them in complex global challenges from interdisciplinary perspectives and deeper connections between academic learning and authentic workplace challenges, with so much to do in all of these areas. And vitally, we need to make more of courses such as capstone courses through which students, when they graduate, can showcase their work to external audiences, bring in people from outside the academy. Students can use advanced multimedia communication skills to really connect with companies, organizations, to showcase what they've done, what they know, what they're proposing for the world, and to build stronger networks and connections both to social leaders, decision makers, particularly beneficial activities for students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds to really enhance their networking. And then finally, in addition, we need to develop an enhanced and accessible menu of transformational learning opportunities that take place outside the classroom, from civic engagement schemes, internships, to entrepreneurial challenges, and of course increased mobility and leadership opportunities. We have a new scheme at the LSE Student Futures, which is donor funded and gives great opportunities for students from all backgrounds to really access these transformational, life-changing opportunities. So the developments of online platforms and other new approaches during the pandemic have been helpful in many ways, but have also, as a colleague has just pointed out, highlighted how important the face-to-face learning is alongside. And my final point is that if we can enable our students of all backgrounds to become partners with us and co-creators as we develop higher education's mission to shape the world, we will be able to more effectively both disrupt the status quo, but also really create a better future for us all.
Well, thank you, and really inspiring. To jump and go overseas, I wanted to ask Lucas Grossman, Rector of the Universidad de San Andrés in Argentina. Campuses have gone from face-to-face to online, as we said, now hybrid models, and there's some way the university could even become, platforms of online content. There's many debate around what the future ahead of us is, no? But what do you think is in store for higher education in Argentina in this regard? Thank you.
So Farah, thank you very much for this invitation. It's great to see everybody. Just as a background fact, Argentina has gone through one of the longest and toughest lockdown in the whole world, and that has certainly applied to universities as well. So now we are finishing a full academic year under lockdown. What has been the result of this year? Well, I think that it has stressed differentiation among universities. And along which lines did that differentiation take place? Well, I don't think that the relevant criterion was face-to-face versus online education. I think that rather what we have seen is that the quality of education has become more visible, more salient to students and the public at large. So which universities did better? Well, those universities who managed to be more innovative, more flexible, and in the end, more relevant. To that extent, I think that the dichotomy between face-to-face and online education has become obsolete. The future will be hybrid, yes, for sure, but the relevant question will again be focused on the quality of the education. When I was a law student many years ago, the typical teaching method was lectures. Well, lectures were not very useful back then, but they became wholly relevant at this time. So the future of education will have to combine what we know makes sense as an online education, but also a rather enhanced face-to-face experience. The pressure will be great for passive classes. The pressure will be great to have classes which are more interactive, with much more intense interaction among students and faculty. A lot of the learning experiences takes place outside of classrooms, and I think that has become extremely relevant and extremely visible during this passing year. So different formats will arise for different audiences, and the combination of that will depend on which your target audience is, of course. But in any case, I think that the mixture of formats will become the rule. Online, synchronic, asynchronic. We cannot take face-to-face education for granted anymore. Face-to-face education now has to justify itself. It has to show us why it's relevant. And the key, as I said, refers to the quality of that experience, to the quality of the interaction that each university offers. So to that extent, I believe I'm optimistic, I'm positive regarding the future. I share the thoughts of my colleague Carlos from Ecuador. I think that our challenge as universities is that the year in which we overcome the pandemic, be it 2021 or 2022, let's hope 2021, it has to be better, of course, than 2020, but also than 2019. I think that's the challenge, that 2021
must be better than 2019, that the learning experience must be richer, and that all the learnings from this year that has been so tough, in the end, lead us to a better place. So that's my hope.
Thank you, Lucas. And actually, what a better horizon to finish this around Peter than a series on the future, and the future is ahead of us as higher education institutions. I wanted to ask Peter Mathiesen, Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of Edinburgh in the UK, are there any silver linings in the current COVID cloud? And how about Brexit? Is there anything there that could be considered an opportunity for higher education?
Thank you, Geoffroy. And it's been a great pleasure to listen to colleagues. Whenever I take part in one of these international events, I'm always struck by the commonality of problems and solutions and the great thoughts that go by. But there's always something that you can learn from your international colleagues. So I've really enjoyed listening to it. So are there any silver linings of COVID? I think the answer to that is yes. You've already heard some of them. I have some ideas. I think there are 5, and I'll give you some quick outline of those 5. Are there any silver linings of Brexit? I find that more difficult. Frankly, I've spent the last few years trying to find a silver lining to Brexit. I voted against it. I think it's a bad idea. But somebody earlier on said something about if Brexit happens. Well, the fact is Brexit has already happened. The UK has left the EU. And at the moment, we're in a transition period, which ends on December the 31st. So there's no longer a discussion in the UK about if Brexit happens, because it's already happened. It's much more about what it means now that it has happened. And for universities, it's all about mitigation. So there are a couple of possible silver linings, which I'll finish up with. So in terms of COVID, I think the 5 silver linings, and some of these have been covered in detail by people before. Firstly, universities have played a fantastic part in the battle against the virus and learning to understand the virus and learning to think about the impacts it has, both in terms of medicine, but also in terms of social science, economics, behavioral science and whatnot. So universities should be very proud of the contributions that they've made, both in terms of public information, but also in terms of contributing to new knowledge. And so I think this has been an opportunity for universities to demonstrate their worth. And I hope that as a result of this, the standing of universities in society and with governments will have been enhanced. The second is that and again, people have talked about this, the incredible speed with which universities adapted and the incredible effectiveness of that. I was interested when Frederick Meon earlier on said that they suspended teaching for 8 days in Sciences Po. We did something similar in Edinburgh, and we moved a 400-something-year-old university fully online in the space of about a week. And like Frederick, if you told me beforehand we were able to do that, I would have had my doubts. But we did, and we did it effectively. Now, we didn't do it perfectly. We made some mistakes. And we also, as other people have said, we weren't developing a fully online delivery model. We were just shifting everything that we could to online delivery, both in terms of teaching and assessment. But we did it well. And I think our staff, all of our staff around the world, have shown incredible resilience and incredible adaptability to these horrible external circumstances. So I think, again, we take pride in that. Thirdly, I think internationalization without travel can be achieved. I was really struck by what Martin Paul said. Of these European University Alliances, I think youth actually has the best name, but it also has this great idea of a virtual international campus. And the European university that we are part of in Edinburgh, which is called Una Europa, is thinking along the same lines. How can we have virtual experiences so that our students can travel without travel, if you like? How can they get experience in another language or another culture from teachers from another university, sharing with other students from different places in the world, but without needing to travel? Because my personal view is that travel will be severely curtailed for months or years to come, partly because of restrictions, but partly because of attitudes. I lived in Hong Kong for years after SARS. The behaviors of people in Hong Kong were affected, even though SARS had disappeared. So I think the impact on behaviors will last a very long time. And we have to think of ways around that. And some of this really creative thinking that's going on in the European University Alliances, I think, is really powerful. So the fourth one is that the change that's been forced upon us is probably change that we should have been undertaking anyway. And what the pandemic has done is accelerated change. And a lot of it, as people have said, will be irreversible and should be irreversible. We should not go back to all the old ways. We should be thinking about what can we learn and what do we want to keep. And then the fifth and final one is that because, and Mamageti Fakeng talked about this earlier on, inequalities have been highlighted. Their profile has been raised, particularly around access to digital means, both in terms of devices, but also in terms of connectivity and in terms of time. And for me, this has just illustrated that the transformative power of education is needed more than ever. So our universities have a really significant role in combating inequality and in being tools of social mobility. And so therefore, the world needs us more than it ever did. And I think that's another reason for being positive. To finish by trying to find some silver linings of Brexit, as I say, I find it very difficult. I think I can talk to two. One is that British universities are very highly regarded. They're highly regarded by our European partners, and they're highly regarded all around the world. And so British universities will remain in demand as partners, and that we should be very proud of that. The UK is not the great manufacturing nation that it once was. There are not so many things that we lead the world in, but we're pretty good at universities. And so this is a national strength, which I think we should see supported. I hope that the UK will look to its strengths and look to invest in those things that it's really, really good at, and universities are one of them. And so I hope that there will be that sort of reaffirmation of the role of British universities in the world despite Brexit. And secondly, there is the possibility of a more global outlook. We will probably, if we lose access to Erasmus, which I think would be a great shame, then the government's replacement for Erasmus will probably be more global. And I'll finish with one comment that I heard on a talk when I was living in Hong Kong. Someone was talking about Brexit, and he said that he thought that Brexit was irrelevant. It didn't matter whether Britain was part of the EU or not. What mattered was the ways in which European countries engage in the future with Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And Europe can do that as in a joined up way, or it can do it as a fragmented structure. But the ways in which we engage with those other massive continents, I think will determine the future. And I hope that Brexit might lead British universities to be even more global in their thinking.
Well, thank you for that, Principal Mathiesen. Well, always at Reinventing Education, we invite also external stakeholders, not only universities, presidents and rectors. I wanted actually to ask Matthias Falkenstein, managing partner at Solas in Germany, consultancy for higher education. As consultant with international university, you've been witnessing many transformations during this year. What has impacted you the most, and which trends do you see in our future?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Geoffroy, for the introduction, but also for having me in this very distinguished panel. It's a great pleasure and honor to be in this panel, and I've been listening very carefully to all of the presentations, and I think I don't want to repeat, and also understanding that time is a bit scarce at this point, so I will really focus on two things. And try to talk about the things that have not been covered at this point. I see, first and foremost, that we have talked about internationalization and online delivery, etc. I was also concerned about the role of the universities themselves and how the universities actually can bring change to their own organizations. So I was questioning that in two different areas, two different segments. Obviously, one we discussed was internationalization. We understand that that COVID actually was bringing an immediate threat to globalization, and therefore also an immediate threat to, or challenged at least, the core of internationalization of higher education. We all agree on that, and we also saw mobility on student faculty level going down. There was not much happening in this regard anymore. And in that context, I found it personally extremely frustrating, because I thought like internationalization for me was a key element of higher education, and that has been built over the past 50 years tremendously. And I saw two parallel worlds growing here in higher education. On one side, we went back to the typical nation-state politics in our countries, and also to rhetorics that we haven't had over a long period of time. And on the other side, we saw internationalization on speed in the online space. We saw internationalization actually growing very quickly with all kinds of exchanges in an online format like this conference here or this gathering. But also I have been speaking at 4 different conferences over the last week that were at 4 different continents. I was at a conference last week that was supposed to be in Miami that used to have 150 participants. This time they had over 2,000 participants in that very conference. So we see on one side an internationalization more in our own offices, home offices, or in our offices. And when we go out, we see more a national or local context. And this is something that I found extremely interesting, encouraging, but also it shows us the opportunities that we have actually in a very new internationalization context. And I do see on one side a withdrawal, and I think all of you, or most of you, have already talked about that, internationalization becoming less of the typical we send faculty or we send students abroad, but more into something that we find a complete new space where internationalization can happen even without meeting or seeing each other in person. And then to something that I found much more challenging, and that was the role of universities that you also touched on, and specifically the role of social, societal, and environmental challenges that we face. And here the question, COVID-19, is it an accelerator or is it a demolisher of the impact agendas of universities? And to that, I have no answer. I can only look in what I see, and I see a growing threat to our democracies and environments. I see universities that are moving to the center of these threats and have to respond to that in their teaching, learning, but also in their research. But of course, the question is, how can universities have a greater impact in the fight against inequality, poverty, and the polarizations in the societal, environmental, and social crises that we all face currently? And just to finalize that, Geoffroy, I do see, of course, us seeing the latest election results in the US, but we also know that this is only a short moment of relief. And we know that universities have to become a stronger force for positive change with impact in our societies. And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges that I see for universities, or biggest responsibilities of universities in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And actually, to finish and to start on the beginning of the day, therefore, in the US, I wanted to ask Nelson Baker, Dean of Professional Education at the Georgia Tech University, how the new vision of the curriculum at Georgia Tech adapted to what the future might demand of us as higher education institutions. Do you think higher education is truly beginning to pivot to meet the needs of learners of all ages, of all backgrounds?
So I just want to say thank you for being part of this panel and this conversation, because I think it's so important for us as higher education organizations and the world in which we live to lead, as so many of you have been talking about. I see this as a yes and approach. It's not giving up our past and all the things that many of us have said, but it's also engaging a broader set of stakeholders in very new ways of how we might be more than what we've been. So Georgia Tech currently, as most of you probably know, has 3 at-scale master's degree programs, now enrolling 16,000 of Georgia Tech's 40,000 total students. The demographics of those individuals are about 3/4 US-based, but 1/4 international. They range from 16 years of age to 84 years of age. They come to us for the quality and for the experience. But while we're seeing that at $10,000 US for the degree, not for a semester, so it's about 25% of the price, it's still too expensive for many. People don't have the internet access that we've talked about, or the access to our physical locations because of life circumstances. So it's more people that need higher education's help, and what might we do to reach them. So as we've embarked upon this journey, it's been a new design for online, not remote education, but actually designing it for an online audience. It's a change in pedagogy. It's certainly a huge change in business model and processes at the university. And downstream, now that we're 7 years into this journey, we're seeing a new engagement and even higher quality in the program and the learners that are participating because of the diversity that comes into these classroom environments. Their perspectives, their cultures are now part of the curriculum in ways that we could not do residentially. So we want to continue to listen to the people, to the organizations, the rate of new knowledge that all of us are creating. We're expected to pass that on to more people, not just to a young generation, but to all people. So we need to predict, we need to plan. We're dynamic organizations. How can we align our strengths with these challenges? Education's more than just the delivery of content. It's the experiences that so many of you have talked about. How can we build that into a Zoom environment? There was one comment about, having dinner and meals and engaging with each other. I miss those too. How can we make something like that? Or rather than mirroring the physical environment, is there a new world that's yet to be explored? I think about film, and just putting a camera in the back of a theater does not capture the play. But when it came to film and special effects, we created something new and different. What's the special effects for education? How might we think about that? So we want to continue to listen. We want to continue to pivot. We want to continue to lead like all of you. We want to collaborate with all of you. But in my view, the world's pivoted. It's not going back to where it was. It's going to be a new place. What's that new place? It's up to us and those in our ecosystems to help shape. But I also worry about what's that mean for our physical infrastructure. And as some of you have already articulated far more than I could do, that value proposition, I think, is up to us to define and to explain. Universities are learning organizations. We're going to keep learning. That's a positive from all of this, not just from the pandemic, but the human condition at large. We're going to learn from the past, the present, and the future as we go forward. And I guess I'll just leave with one thought. Tomorrow, today is going to be yesterday. What have we accomplished in this rapidly changing world? I just thank all of you for your insights and your thoughts.
Well, thank you for this, the special effect of higher education. I think we can all keep thinking about it and putting it into practice in our institutions. Well, I've been informed by the team that we don't have specific questions regarding the panels. Actually, we're fantastically nailing it to 4 in the afternoon here in Madrid time. And just for the last minute and just 1 minute, as Anne was saying in the beginning, wanted to give back the floor to President Santiago Iniguez to close this event. And thanks once more. It has been a pleasure to be your host, and see you soon in Rome next November.
Thanks very much, Geoffroy, and thanks very much to all the contributors. You've made really valuable contributions, so thanks for sharing your experiences and your vision. I have the firm belief and the hope, of course, that we will resume our normal activities in the fall 2021. I'm sure of this given all the advances in vaccines, in palliative treatments, in sanitary protocols, and of course in social practices. But hopefully we will be again, in presence and also at our conference in Rome, which will be hosted by Luis University in their campus there in Rome on November the 15th and the 16th. So you're all invited to attend. But in the meantime, of course, we will be in contact. What I hope is that we resume most of our activities, and we also learn from all the experiences with these hybrid formats and with the other many different things that have happened on our campuses. So again, thanks very much. Take care, of course. And what I look forward is to seeing you very soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Santiago.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Santiago, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Santiago, Geoffroy. Muchas gracias. Excelente.
Carlos.
Va a estar dispuesto esto online para